Welcome to The Debate. If you want to instantly become fluent in English, or really any foreign language you've been studying, one of the most scientifically proven methods is actually surprisingly simple.
Oh boy, here we go.
No, seriously, have a glass of wine.
Okay, wow.
Right? Why? Because, well, the words you are desperately searching for are already in your head. You're just too terrified to let them out. So today we are tearing down what is probably the most universally frustrating wall in language learning.
Yeah.
That experience of being a passive genius, but like an active mute.
And just to clarify right off the bat for everyone listening, we're absolutely not prescribing a stiff drink as a permanent educational strategy.
No, definitely not.
We are highlighting a pretty wild phenomenon that points to a really profound mystery in how human beings acquire language.
Exactly. Because it's a universally maddening experience. You can sit in a cafe, right? You eavesdrop on the table next to you, you catch the jokes, you follow the nuance, and you feel completely immersed in the English they're speaking.
Right. You feel like a local.
Yeah, but then the second the barista turns to you and asks a basic question, your mind just goes entirely blank.
Total white noise.
Total white noise. Your mouth opens and nothing comes out. So today we're exploring the science and the psychology of that exact freeze, and I'm going to be arguing that this gap is fundamentally a neurocognitive reality.
Okay.
It's a structural issue of how the brain accesses information, right? A mechanical bottleneck in working memory that absolutely has to be overcome through active recall and structured cognitive friction.
Right. And I am arguing that looking at this purely as some sort of mechanical failure, it completely ignores the human element of communication. I mean, we are not just hard drives retrieving data, you know?
We kind of are.
We're really not. I posit that this gap is primarily an affective, psychological barrier. It is driven by emotional variables, fear of judgment, and literally a loss of identity. And until you dismantle that psychological wall by creating emotional safety, all the cognitive drilling in the world won't make a learner fluent. It'll just traumatize them further.
Okay, well, let's start with the hard biology then. Because I think we really have to look at the actual mechanisms of language to understand why this freeze happens in the first place.
Sure.
It's not a personal failing, right? It is a physical reality in the architecture of your brain. Comprehension and production, they're not handled by the same department.
No, they're not.
When you're sitting in that cafe listening, you're primarily using Wernicke's area, which is located in the temporal lobe. And Wernicke's area is cheap, it's fast, and it's highly efficient, because really its only job is pattern matching.
Right. It's just inferring meaning from context. Like if you hear the English words weather, hot, and beach, you don't need to parse the advanced grammar to know what the conversation is about.
Precisely. You just get it. The cognitive load of understanding is vastly lower. But speaking, that is governed by Broca's area in the frontal lobe. And Broca's area operates like a stressed-out general contractor on a chaotic construction site.
That's a good way to put it.
Right? Because it has to gather the vocabulary, apply the grammatical rules, conjugate the English irregular verbs in real time, and then send these hyper-specific motor commands to your tongue, lips, and vocal cords.
All in milliseconds.
Yes, all in a matter of milliseconds. And Wernicke's and Broca's areas, they're connected by a bundle of nerve fibers called the arcuate fasciculus. That bridge is essentially a muscle. And if you just listen to English podcasts or watch YouTube, you are never, ever flexing it.
Okay, I don't dispute the neurobiology. Wernicke and Broca's are distinct, yes? But your model treats the human brain like an engine that just needs, more gas or a heavier foot on the pedal.
Well,
It completely overlooks why the engine is stalling in the first place. And this brings us to Stephen Krashen's effective filter hypothesis, which is absolutely central to the source material we're discussing.
right.
Humans are profoundly social creatures. When you, as a mature, highly competent adult, try to speak a foreign language, you are instantly stripped of your sophistication. You are reduced to sounding like a toddler.
Oh, it is deeply humbling. There is no question about that.
Humbling is an understatement. For many people, it is psychologically terrifying. It triggers this entire cascade of emotional variables, right? The fear of negative evaluation, peer judgment, a sudden crash in self-esteem.
Sure.
And the affective filter is not just a metaphor. When these emotions spike, they create a literal physiological barrier. Your body releases cortisol, which actively inhibits the prefrontal cortex. The anxiety physically blocks language input from being processed into output. Your brain goes into a state of fight or flight. And a brain in fight or flight prioritizes survival, not conjugating English verbs.
Okay. Let's unpack that fight or flight response. Because I agree the panic is real, right? I'm not denying that. But I argue that the panic is not the root cause. The panic is merely a symptom of a massive cognitive overload.
A symptom?
Yes. Let's walk through the actual microseconds of trying to speak. When an English learner is put on the spot, they rarely try to conceptualize their response directly in English. Instead, they formulate the thought in their native language, their L1, and then they try to translate it directly into English, their L2.
Wait, so you're saying the brain is essentially trying to hold two distinct linguistic operating systems in its working memory simultaneously?
Exactly. It is a massive processing error. Let's say a native Spanish speaker wants to say something relatively simple in English, like, "I wish it were raining."
Okay.
First, their brain formulates the native Spanish phrase. Then, they have to hold that Spanish phrase in their working memory while desperately searching their mental dictionary for the English equivalent of wish.
Right.
Then they realize the grammar rules are different. Oh wait, English uses the subjunctive mood here, so it's were not was. Then they have to figure out how to physically articulate those unfamiliar English phonemes, like that R sound.
It's a lot.
It's too much. Your working memory has a strict physiological limit. It simply cannot hold the native sentence, run the translation algorithm, map the foreign grammar, and operate the vocal cords at the exact same time. It overloads and the brain stalls. The freeze is a capacity issue. It's a mechanical bottleneck of extraneous cognitive load.
Okay, I hear you. But I have to push back hard on this idea that it is purely a capacity issue or like a mechanical bottleneck. And actually, I'll use your own opening hook against you here.
Oh, go on.
If the freeze were purely a matter of lacking the neural pathways or a strict limit on working memory RAM, then a glass of wine would be catastrophic.
Ah.
Think about the mechanics of alcohol or deep hypnosis, which the source material explicitly highlights as this fascinating phenomenon in language acquisition. Alcohol actively impairs cognitive function.
Right, it definitely doesn't make you smarter.
Exactly. It certainly does not increase your working memory capacity. It does not miraculously build new nerve fibers in the arcuate fasciculus. Yet, individuals often speak a foreign language with remarkable fluency after a drink. What is the mechanism there?
Lowered inhibition?
Lowered inhibition. It temporarily dismantles the shame of sounding foolish. The fact that lowering inhibition suddenly unlocks a learner's ability to speak, that proves the vocabulary and the neural pathways were already built. They were sitting right there in Broca's area. The freeze is primarily a manifestation of the affective filter. It's an emotional blockade, not a hard limit on cognitive capacity.
Okay, well, your point about alcohol completely dismantling the strict cognitive capacity argument is brilliant. I have to concede that.
Thank you.
If the English words weren't in there, the alcohol couldn't magically conjure them. But I think we need a better analogy to understand what that alcohol is actually doing, because it isn't making them a master speaker. It's just making them a reckless one.
Reckless, sure, but communicative.
Communicative, but let's look at this through the lens of driving a car.
Okay.
Understanding English, listening to it on a podcast, or watching a movie is exactly like sitting in the passenger seat or watching traffic from the sidewalk.
Right.
You can watch a manual transmission race car every single weekend. You can memorize the rules, you can know exactly at what RPM the driver needs to shift gears, and you can anticipate every single turn.
Because Wernicke's area is engaged.
Exactly. But if I suddenly take you and drop you into the driver's seat of that car on a busy highway, you are going to stall the engine immediately. Why? Not just because you're having a panic attack, but because you literally haven't trained the physical and cognitive coordination required to operate the clutch, the gas, and the steering wheel simultaneously.
Okay, but where does the alcohol fit into this driving analogy?
Right, so taking away your fear, giving you a glass of wine, might make you much more willing to step on the gas. You won't care as much when the gears grind.
Fair.
But taking away the fear of crashing doesn't magically teach you how to shift the gears smoothly. You still lack the mechanical skill. The alcohol simply allows you to tolerate the horrendous mistakes you are making while driving.
You know, I actually love that analogy Because it exposes the biggest lie in the language learning community.
Which is?
It leads us right into this pervasive, toxic myth that if you just watch enough traffic, if you just consume enough passive input, you will eventually figure out how to drive.
Yes! Oh, we are completely aligned there. The myth of more input.
It's everywhere. Millions of learners think, I froze when talking to my English-speaking coworker. Therefore, my vocabulary isn't big enough. I need to go home and read 3 more books in English.
I need another flashcard deck.
Exactly. But passive exposure will never, ever cure the speaking gap. Where we diverge fundamentally, though, is on the solution.
Right.
You want to force them into the driver's seat onto a busy highway. You advocate for Meryl Sweeney's theory of pushed output.
I do. And the cognitive science of the testing effect backs this up entirely. See, passive review like rereading a vocabulary list or watching a movie with subtitles creates this really dangerous illusion of competence. Wernicke's area recognizes the word, so your brain tricks you into thinking, oh yeah, I know that.
Yep.
But the testing effect proves that active recall, the actual uncomfortable struggle of trying to retrieve a piece of information without looking at the answer, is the biological mechanism that creates durable, long-term memory. We must force learners into pushed output.
Even if they panic?
Yes, because when you are forced to speak, you suddenly realize, oh wow, I actually have no idea how to say the word for stapler in English. That specific realization of a gap, that moment of failure, is required for the brain to tag that vocabulary as necessary for survival. If you don't push the output, the brain just gets lazy.
But forcing that struggle without a psychological safety net is a disaster. Applying pushed output purely as a mechanical drill without regard for the learner's emotional state is incredibly destructive.
I wouldn't say destructive.
It is. Let's look at the actual mechanisms of anxiety using the data from the Indian college students cited in the research. We have to understand why they are the perfect case study for the affective filter here.
Right, because of the high-stakes environment.
Exactly. In India, English is not just a fun hobby or like a casual academic subject. It is the ultimate gatekeeper. It is a high-stakes marker of social mobility, perceived intelligence, and employability.
The pressure is immense.
Right. So when these students are forced into public speaking or group debates, which is your pushed output, they do not experience a helpful cognitive struggle that cements memory.
What do they experience?
They experience intense, identity-threatening test anxiety. The research explicitly shows that this environmental pressure causes learner silence. They withdraw completely. The cortisol spikes, the prefrontal cortex shuts down, and Broca's area is literally cut off. The cognitive overload you keep talking about is actually triggered by the anxiety. If you push output without emotional scaffolding, you aren't building a muscle. You are causing trauma. And you're reinforcing their deeply held belief that they are fundamentally incapable of speaking the language.
Okay, I hear you. And the cortisol mechanism is a fair point. But we cannot let the fear of a cortisol spike prevent us from applying effective cognitive strategies, you know? We can't just coddle the brain if we wanted to adapt.
It's not coddling. It's...
Well, let me finish. We can structure this push so it's highly productive rather than traumatic. We need a concrete action plan, treating this like the mechanical skill it is. So let me pitch you a cognitive approach to fixing this speaking gap, and you tell me where it fails.
Oh, I'm ready. Let's hear it.
Step 1. Retrieval under time pressure.
Oh, no.
Hear me out. If you give a learner unlimited time to answer a question, what do? They overthink. They translate from their native L1. They analyze the grammar, and they overload their working memory.
Right.
But if you implement a strict 5 to 8 second timer for answering simple, repetitive prompts in English, you force the brain to bypass that perfectionism. It's a microdrill that builds automaticity. You don't have time to translate. You just have to grab the fastest available word and throw it out there.
Are you genuinely kidding right now?
Not at all.
If an English learner is already terrified of making a mistake, putting a ticking 5-second timer in front of their face is going to induce a literal panic attack. That is exactly what I'm talking about with ambiguity tolerance.
Okay, define that for the listener because it's a crucial term.
Right, so ambiguity tolerance is a measurable psychological trait. It is basically how comfortable you are navigating uncertain, imperfect, and messy situations.
Right.
Most high-achieving adults have very low ambiguity tolerance when it comes to intellectual tasks. They want to be right. A timer doesn't train automaticity for someone with low ambiguity tolerance. It triggers the fight or flight freeze response even faster. Action plans have to be rooted in building psychological safety first, otherwise your cognitive drills just bounce off a brick wall.
So how do you lower the filter, then, without removing the necessary practice?
By changing the environment. Step 1 of an affective action plan. Delayed, major errors only correction. Teachers and even native speaker conversation partners absolutely must stop interrupting learners mid-sentence to correct their grammar or pronunciation. Overcorrection during real-time speech is the fastest way to spike the affective filter. It signals to the learner that they are constantly failing.
Right.
Let them speak, let them stumble, and only intervene if the error completely destroys the meaning of the sentence.
Okay, I actually agree with that, but for entirely cognitive reasons.
Wait, really?
Yes, interrupting a learner mid-flow is disastrous for their working memory. You are injecting extraneous information into their brain while they are already maxed out trying to assemble an English sentence. It shatters the active recall process.
You see, the emotional safety enables the cognitive process.
Well, let's look at step 2 of my cognitive plan, because I think it addresses your concern about panic anyway.
Let's hear it.
If the brain is panicking because it's assembling grammar from scratch, we can reduce the cognitive load through chunking.
Ah, chunking.
Right. Instead of memorizing isolated vocabulary words, like clarification, learners should memorize full, functional phrases. Chunks like, would you mind clarifying, or I've never thought about it that way, but...
Yeah.
You learn them as a single melody. This drastically reduces the processing power required because you aren't assembling would and you and mind on the fly. You are deploying a prepackaged unit of language. It bypasses the grammar assembly bottleneck entirely.
I completely support chunking. It's a brilliant strategy, but specifically because it serves an affective purpose. It gives the learner a psychological life raft.
A life raft?
Yes, if they have a few of these chunks locked and loaded, they feel safer entering a conversation. But again, where do they practice this? You can't just start them on a stage. Step 2 of the effective plan has to be low-stakes environments.
Right.
You start with anonymous response mechanisms or tiny, peer-led groups where everyone is at the exact same level, a place where making a mess of the English language is completely normalized and expected.
A sandbox, essentially.
Exactly, a sandbox where falling over doesn't hurt.
Okay, but eventually they have to leave the sandbox, right? And when they do, they are going to encounter a word they don't know, and the panic is going to set in again, which brings me to the third and most vital cognitive strategy, circumlocution practice.
Okay.
This is the spare tire of language learning. Circumlocution is the deliberate skill of talking around a word you've forgotten.
Right.
You forget the English word for stapler, you don't freeze and try to translate it. You say, the thing you use to attach papers. It's not the ideal wheel, but it keeps the car rolling so you don't stall out in the middle of the highway. We have to actively train learners to define things on the fly like that.
Circumlocution is great, but getting a learner to push through the frustration of having to describe a stapler requires something deeper. It requires my third point, intrinsic motivation.
Interesting.
You have to bridge the agonizing gap between a learner's mature, complex inner life and their elementary language skills. If you force an adult to talk about the weather or the colors of the rainbow like a toddler, they feel humiliated, they disengage.
Sure, it's boring.
It's more than boring, it's demeaning. But if you allow them to explore topics deeply relevant to their identity, their career, their passions, their philosophical beliefs, their intrinsic motivation acts as a buffer against the anxiety. They want to communicate their complex thoughts so badly that they actually push through the fear.
You know, this is fascinating because we are basically looking at the exact same phenomenon through two different microscopes.
Are we?
Yeah. Think about it. Your effective strategies, like delayed correction and intrinsic motivation, are ultimately serving my cognitive goals. When motivation is high, the brain literally allocates more attentional resources to the task. It floods the system with dopamine, which effectively optimizes the available working memory. And delayed correction keeps the retrieval pathways clear of interference.
And your cognitive strategies like chunking and circumlocution are ultimately serving my affective goals.
Right.
Having prepackaged phrases and knowing how to talk around missing words lowers anxiety. It builds the learner's ambiguity tolerance because they know they have tools to survive a messy conversation.
So the question isn't whether it's cognitive or emotional.
No.
The question is the ratio. How do we actually implement this? Because my core position remains that speaking is fundamentally a mechanical cognitive skill. The physical gap between Wernicke's area and Broca's area can only be bridged by the friction of active recall. You cannot meditate your way into fluency, and you cannot just feel safe enough to suddenly speak a language you haven't mechanically practiced.
Right.
I would argue the approach needs to be heavily weighted toward cognitive drilling, say a 70-30 split in favor of pushed output. You have to do the reps.
And I vehemently disagree with that ratio. I argue that the first 6 months to a year of active speaking practice must be 90% emotional safety and affective scaffolding.
90%?
Yes, communication is inherently social. It is deeply tied to human identity. You cannot treat a human being like a malfunctioning hard drive that just needs more reps. Until that affective filter is lowered through empathy, low-stakes environments, and a cultivated tolerance for ambiguity, those cognitive pathways you want to build will remain locked behind a wall of cortisol. A nervous brain simply will not acquire or produce language efficiently, no matter how many 5-second timers you put in front of it.
Well, I still think 90% emotional safety risks coddling the learner into a state of permanent comfort where they never experience the necessary friction of failure. But I will concede that a 50-50 split might be the most realistic path forward.
Fair enough. Regardless of the exact ratio, I think we have reached a very powerful point of convergence today that every single listener needs to hear.
Absolutely. We both firmly agree that the most common advice given to frustrated language learners, just watch more movies, just read more books, just learn more vocabulary, is entirely false. Passive exposure alone will never, ever lead to active fluency.
Consuming more content feels incredibly productive.
It does. It feels good. It's emotionally safe, and it's cognitively easy because Wernicke's area is just coasting along on context clues. But it is a trap. It builds recognition, not retrieval. Language acquisition is a beautifully complex, dual challenge. To truly bridge the gap between understanding a language and actually speaking it, learners must rigorously train their brains through forced output while simultaneously managing their psychology to accept their own imperfections.
Which brings us right back to that cafe. The next time you find yourself understanding the English podcast perfectly, but freezing when the barista speaks to you, remember what is actually happening under the hood. You aren't failing.
No.
Your brain isn't broken. You are just standing at the chaotic intersection of Broca's area and your own effective filter.
So it is up to you to evaluate your own language journey. Ask yourself honestly, when you freeze, is it because you haven't done the mechanical reps to build the chunks and access the vocabulary? Or is it because your cortisol is spiking and you are terrified of sounding foolish?
Yeah.
The barrier might be cognitive or it might be emotional. Figuring out which wall is blocking your path is your first step toward true fluency.
A fascinating question to ponder for anyone trying to find their voice.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.